Hello everyone and welcome to the 54th seminar presented by the Centre of Research Excellence in Aphasia Recovery. I'm Dr. Rebecca Sullivan, a postdoctoral researcher within the Speech Pathology Department at La Trobe University and Aphasia CRE and co-facilitator of the CRE seminars along with Dr. John Pearce. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we live and work across Australia. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging and extend our respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today we're hearing from Professor Catherine Off about the structure and process of training student speech pathologists and related health professionals to deliver high-quality, evidence-based treatment in the context of an intensive comprehensive aphasia program. So please submit your questions for Catherine using the Q&A feature in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And we would ask that you avoid using the chat for questions, please. You're welcome to submit questions at any point during the presentation. This feature also allows other participants to like the questions that they're most interested in, and I'll prioritise the most popular ones when we begin the Q&A. Please keep your questions brief and focused and avoid submitting general comments. We've reserved some time at the end of Professor Off's talk to address as many questions as possible. So it's my pleasure to now introduce today's speaker, Professor Catherine Off. Cathy Off is a professor and chair in the School of Speech, Language, Hearing and Occupational Sciences at the University of Montana, who directs the Behavioural Research for Aphasia and Intensive Neurorehabilitation Brain Lab. She also founded and co-directs the Big Sky Aphasia Program, which offers comprehensive outpatient aphasia rehabilitation services for stroke survivors, including an Intensive Comprehensive Aphasia Program, or ICAP. Cathy is currently President-elect for the Academy of Neurologic Communication Disorders and Sciences and the guest editor for the proceedings of the 2025 Clinical Aphasiology Conference. She is affiliated with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services Stroke Work Group, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, and Aphasia Access. Cathy completed her PhD at the University of Washington in 2008 with an emphasis on stroke, aphasia rehabilitation, and behavioural neuroplasticity. After working for a short time as a lecturer at California State University, she joined the faculty at the University of Montana in 2011. Her research focuses on increasing treatment intensiveness and comprehensiveness and reducing rural health disparities for those living with chronic aphasia. Cathy is currently spearheading an international collaboration of ICAP researchers, clinicians and students to move the model forward as best practice.
Are we seeing that okay?
I am.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone in Australia, and for anyone joining from the United States, good afternoon or good evening. I'm really excited to chat with you today a bit about some of our experiences of working with graduate student clinicians at the University of Montana in the context of the Intensive Comprehensive Aphasia Program that we run here. I hope that I'll be able to leave you today feeling confident about some ways to successfully and meaningfully integrate graduate student clinicians into models like the ICAP and to help you feel good about how we can make sure that we're really empowering these students, right, to move forward in this complicated model. I thought I'd just give you a bit of an overview of where I thought we could get to today. I'll do a real quick, brief anatomy of the ICAP service delivery model for those that might not be as familiar with it as others. A real brief introduction to the University of Montana's ICAP, what it looks like structurally. Talk a little bit about why we think it's so important to include graduate student clinicians in ICAPs. And then I thought I would highlight and summarize some of the smaller research projects that we've been doing recently to look at how what the experience is like for graduate student clinicians in an ICAP. And then we'll get into kind of the meat, the logistics of running an ICAP model with graduate student clinicians and wrap it up with a bit of a summary of some of our insights about kind of what we've learned over these past 10 years of including graduate student clinicians in this model. And I hope to leave lots of time for some discussion and questions at the end. I thought I would just start with just the quick recap of what an ICAP looks like. Right, this is the general framework of an ICAP that's based on the seminal work from Miranda Rose and colleagues in 2013 and more recently in 2021, which laid out the original specifications for what should be included in an ICAP. This model is comprised of three primary components: the intensiveness component, the comprehensiveness component, and the use of a cohort model to deliver these pieces of aphasia rehabilitation. As has been kind of originally defined, the ICAP must implement a minimum of at least 30 hours across a minimum of a 2-week period. But what we're really looking at here, right, is a short duration, high intensity delivery schedule with high within and across session treatment practice dosage, right? So not just the number of days and hours that we're concerned about, but with the real practice that's happening within each of the types of sessions that patients are getting in this model. Most of the time, we are harnessing all of these principles of neuroplasticity, including intensity and repetition and saliency, those sorts of things, throughout the program as well. From a comprehensive standpoint, we're thinking about things like the variety of treatment session types. So one-on-one individual sessions, small group sessions, large group sessions, perhaps lots of programs are starting to include interprofessional components. Certainly, patient and family psychoeducation and communication partner training are at the heart of the comprehensiveness of this model. And really importantly, that all of the types of sessions that are delivered are patient or family centered, and they goals target all levels of the World Health model of International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health, right? So we're looking at things beyond the impairment, and certainly including participation in that as well. Patients that enroll in these models all start and stop the program at the same time. And there's loads of evidence to suggest that this cohort model is grounded in, strong evidence of neurorehabilitation, lots of psychosocial support, and good implementation science evidence as well. The ICAP that we run at the University of Montana has developed over the last 10 to 12 years. And so we've refined the way we implement things. Currently, the model is a 4-week intervention period. During that intervention, patients and their families are coming 4 days a week. That's Tuesday through Friday. They're with us 5 to 6 hours a day. And they're receiving 84 treatment sessions over the course of those 4 weeks. Our ICAP has been refined over the last 10 years and is only implemented once per year in our summer, so between May and July, when graduate student clinicians are not otherwise engaged in a full academic course load. This is really important for the success of this program. We tried it a couple of times in other parts of the academic year and had less success, both from a patient satisfaction standpoint and also from a student satisfaction standpoint. And so for us, having the space for this physical space, but really the time space for students to engage in this ICAP rotation as their sole effort for almost 6 weeks is crucial. Involved in this ICAP, we do pre and post testing. So that's the week or two before and the week or two after the ICAP. And our treatment sessions are a mix of one-on-one individual sessions. So that's the clinician and the patient. Small group sessions, which would be things like 2 to 4 patients with aphasia and their clinicians. And then large group sessions, which includes all of the patients and their clinicians, and we'll talk a little bit about what that enrollment might look like. Just to kind of set the stage, right? And before we get into the details of the graduate student clinicians who are involved, I thought it might help just for you to see all of the moving parts that happen in this model. We enroll 8 families living with aphasia for each of the ICAPs that we run each year. During each semester prior to the ICAP, I work very closely with the graduate student advisor and clinical placement director to understand which students will be assigned to this rotation clinically. And so you see some of these support staff folks listed as additional team members. Um, Typically, half of the students, so you see that 8 graduate student clinicians are also enrolled in this rotation. It is a one-to-one pairing. So each student is assigned a family living with aphasia as their primary responsibility for the duration of the program. And all of our students are directly supervised by 2 ICAP trained clinical educators. So these are 2 masters in speech language pathology, right? They're speech language pathologists who are trained to provide supervision for our students, but they've been trained in the ICAP model, and they directly supervise all of the work that the graduate students are doing. We split them in half, so each clinical educator has 4 students. Typically, half of the students that are enrolled in our ICAP are students who attend our Masters of Science Speech Language Pathology program on campus, and the other half are students who are attending the same program asynchronously, synchronously, but at a distance. So they attend coursework remotely with our campus students, but they don't do any clinical rotations until the summer when they come for this rotation. So we'll talk a little bit more about how that kind of plays into our student enrollment and engagement throughout this program. But we'll kind of come back to that. I also just wanted to mention some of the additional team members. Both myself and Jenna Griffin Music direct the program, and so we're working on all the kind of behind the scenes programmatic aspects of the program and any research that is going on each summer. We have a variety of interprofessional collaborators and their graduate students, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. And also a number of folks who are 12-month staff, or our clinic director who's a 12-month employee. And so some of their time is dedicated to some of the clinical documentation sorts of things that go on to run this program. Because we're a university, we're also always running research protocols. And so at any given time, there are different collaborators and research students involved in these programs. So why would we build an ICAP around graduate student clinician training? Certainly, we are a university, and the mission of our program is to train graduate student clinicians in speech language pathology. We had the wonderful opportunity of of our graduate school here being fairly young. So the program began in 2009. I came on in 2011. And so there was a lot of room for strategic planning, creative thinking, without a lot of history of what had been done previously to train graduate student clinicians. And so, it's led to us having a pretty strong feeling of knowing that there are advantages to having these graduate student clinicians in the ICAP model. We have, I think, equally been able to prioritize the experience for the graduate student clinician and the families living with aphasia. And I think that's a really important point to bring to the forefront, is that there is a balance, and there's some give and take that has to happen as you're developing these models. But ultimately, right, we've learned that there are a number of benefits to including graduate student clinicians in this model. From a big picture perspective, our goal is to increase the number of ICAPs that exist worldwide. with a dream, right, of making it possible that anybody with aphasia would have the opportunity, if they wanted it, to participate in this kind of program. That's going to be impossible if we don't use graduate student clinicians for staffing purposes. Um, the cost of staffing is incredibly high. And so, as you can see kind of here on this slide, some of the benefits to families is that using graduate student clinicians to deliver the services reduces the cost of the ICAP model overall. It increases, right, in theory, access to ICAPs if more and more university systems or even public sector systems that are implementing graduate student clinicians as their leads. This can increase that access. And we strongly feel that this is providing high quality evidence-based tailored interventions for the families. I'd love to answer lots of questions about who these students are and what they bring to the table and why we think they do such a great job in this model. But we'll kind of come back around to that later. We also know that this model is incredibly beneficial to our graduate student clinicians. So it provides very efficient short duration student training. I think of this particularly for our students who come to campus for a summer for they must have a 50-hour plus rotation. We're giving them up to 84 hours of direct clinical contact during this rotation. And so they're getting really solid training in a short period of time. We also noticed that the expertise in aphasia rehabilitation is increasing. It increases opportunities for our students to have interprofessional practice and interprofessional education. We're actually growing this model as much as we can on this campus to pull in as many different healthcare professions, which is really benefiting not just our students, of course, but all of the graduate students in the healthcare professions as well. And we're starting to see this idea that students are starting to view themselves, right, as stakeholders in making healthcare decision-making processes. And so, they're going to ultimately be out in the field and advocating for our families living with aphasia. And this model, because it is so big and has so many parts, it allows them to see a little bit more of the kind of inner workings of the healthcare system than sometimes the just one-on-one individual sessions do. And then we think that there are likely going to be benefits to the healthcare system and it's down the road, right? Using graduate student clinicians allows us to keep the ICAP model running. And it certainly is increasing the clinical expertise of this model. And so hopefully that pays off down the road for maybe non-university ICAPs. So for this next little part, I thought I would talk through a couple of the studies that we have uh, implemented at the University of Montana to look at graduate student clinician training. So the first study that I want to talk to you about was a study that we did as a result of translating our ICAP to a telehealth ICAP during COVID. We ran an interprofessional collaboration with a counseling department, right, to provide some more psychosocial support for our families. And so I thought I'd talk through this study a little bit. Big picture, collectively, these studies help us explore different aspects of the graduate student clinician involvement in ICAPs and to understand the experience of graduate student clinicians in participating in these various aspects. Okay, so with a little tiny bit of money from from a university seed grant, we were able to task 2 graduate student clinicians, one from speech language pathology and one from counseling, to develop and facilitate a weekly 60-minute interprofessional community aphasia group that would provide aphasia and wellness education to stroke survivors with aphasia that were enrolled in the ICAP. We had hoped, right, through this process that they would also increase their own knowledge and skills. From a kind of procedural perspective, these 2 students met for about 1.5 months prior to the ICAP, starting with some exchange of information and getting to know each other's professions, right? So understanding interprofessional role development, and then kind of gradually moving into developing the weekly content and delivery strategies for this telehealth-based community aphasia group. Immediately following the final week of the ICAP, the two students completed a written self-reflection that focused on the knowledge and skills that they gained pertaining to aphasia management and aphasia awareness. Also the knowledge and skills pertaining to interprofessional practice, and then specifically to the knowledge and skills about interprofessional aphasia psychoeducation and wellness program that they developed. And so we learned a little bit from these students. The graduate student clinicians reported that they absolutely improved their own skills, knowledge, and attitudes of their own discipline and of their peers, right? So the SLP learned lots of stuff about counseling, and the counselor learned a whole lot of stuff about speech language pathology. And both of them reported improving their understanding of the various challenges that people with aphasia were experiencing in this program, and some of the ways that they could support these families during interprofessional practice. We also learned some things we could do better when training students in this kind of context. The crux of what these students really wanted was a little bit more time to have interprofessional rapport building and planning. So even that 1.5 month was not quite enough time for them to continue to build their rapport and to have enough time to plan these sessions. They wanted a little bit more in terms of expectations of what these kinds of community aphasia groups would look like and what interprofessional practice should look like, and increased amount of guidance and feedback. You'll see that this is kind of a recurring theme with graduate student clinicians. They want loads and loads of feedback. We also found that they really wanted to know more about the bigger picture of the ICAP. So not just their piece as the clinician implementing the ICAP, but the broader scope of what an ICAP is and why it's being implemented and where it fits in the healthcare system. And so they really wanted to be part of larger ICAP team meetings whenever possible. Some of these feelings could have come from the siloed effect of Zoom during COVID. And so we're not sure if we were to repeat this same process now when there's lots of time for finding people in the hallway, that you would have this same exact feeling. And then both of the team members really wanted to learn more about how to individualize group topics for the people with aphasia who were enrolled in that particular ICAP, right? So this tailoring of the psychoeducation and wellness for specific individuals, and how to do that in a timely fashion. Our second study focused on understanding graduate student clinicians as stakeholders in both ICAP implementation and ICAP research. And so in this study, we conducted a focus group of 7 graduate student clinicians before they started the implementation phase of the ICAP, so during their orientation. And the goal of this study was to gain insight into what they thought about their about student outcomes and how student outcomes should be assessed, and examined both by our clinical educators and from a research perspective. And so we did this before they did the program so that the ICAP implementation phase didn't influence their problem solving. So we asked them, what they want. So as student clinicians who are acquiring knowledge and skills in the context of an ICAP, what do you see as important issues for developing future research protocols that explore student clinician outcomes in the context of an ICAP? We also asked them some follow-up questions about, what does it mean to be a stakeholder in research? What should researchers do to help include students in their processes? And what do you see as your role as an ICAP clinician in ICAP research? So we learned a handful of things from this study. The students repeatedly talked about this idea of being in it all together. So the ICAP is a challenging context to learn in. It's fast paced. It's requires dynamic feedback, and so I think the bonding that happens between the graduate student clinicians is quite high. As you can see here, they had some clear recommendations for us as we start to think about um, including them in research, but also including them in the ICAP as well. Um, they talked a lot about how important it was for the ICAP leaders and the ICAP researchers to understand the characteristics that the graduate student clinicians brought to the context, right? And so when developing implementation procedures, considering the preparedness of the cohort is really important. So baseline characteristics that they referred to included things like demographic information, the learning modality for graduate students, and the experiential history included things like the number of clinical rotations they may have had prior to the ICAP, clinical clock hours they may have received, and maybe any previous health care or professional experience they had before coming to graduate school. So you can kind of see in the table that we've provided here that some of our students had clinical experiences prior to this ICAP and some did not. Some were distance learning students, some were campus, and there's a variety, right, of other degrees and certificates completed prior to joining our Master's of Science program. Um, I think the students were really keen to tell us that the diversity of their cohort supported peer mentorship. It really supported relationship dynamics and collaborative work. So they really liked that they all came from different perspectives and different experiences and different levels of expertise. One of the things I thought was so interesting was that there is this need for trust in the clinical educators to guide them through the rapid learning and complexities of the ICAP model. And so we need to be thinking about how we build that trust very quickly. Um, and they expected their outcomes to include, obviously, improved clinical competencies, clinical confidence, but they also thought that their psychosocial well being and resilience would improve as a result of participating in a program like this. They also thought that there was a possibility that they may have this role as an ICAP ambassador in the workforce once they graduate. And remember, this is before they've implemented the ICAP. So these are things they were thinking about as they were entering this rotation and preparing. But they really wanted to be fully involved as much as possible. Okay, the last study I'm going to share with you is not published yet, but it has been presented on a couple of times at in different ways at different conferences. We have all these references at the end of the slides if you're looking for them. But this particular study was looking at the graduate student clinicians' perspectives of collecting dosage data in the context of the ICAP model. So data collection is something, right, our students report being of high value, but also of high stress for them as they're learning to be clinicians. And this study let us look at some of those issues that they were experiencing as they collected very high within session data. So this study was a focus group as well of 8 graduate student clinicians, and we talked to them during week 3 of a 4-week ICAP. So they'd had some time in the ICAP, but they weren't done yet. They had had an 80-hour ICAP orientation before participating in the ICAP, and they had been trained to do some session dosage tracking within their individual treatment sessions. So not during the group sessions for this particular study, but during the individual sessions. Um, so they were asked to describe their experience of collecting data in the ICAP. And they had, collectively 192 individual sessions tracking 9 different impairment-focused treatments using some very tailored logs that we had created for them. And so this was, a really cool opportunity for us to understand what it's like to feel the intensity from the student's perspective. So what we learned here from this study is that graduate student clinicians want lots and lots of opportunities for training and to have so in vivo and in-person training, but then also to have the opportunity to have materials that they can access after the orientation sessions. So lots of training materials. We know that they wanted in additional opportunities to practice their skills during the training. So, especially for this dose data collection. And then they wanted some, in terms of the materials, they really wanted some videos and some examples of different kinds of treatment sessions so that there was a little bit more variety so they could understand how to be dynamic in their data collection. They also reported that this kind of intense data collection process improved their confidence. So in the very beginning, students were not confident. They had trouble multitasking as would be expected as they're learning these clinical skills and trying to do good data collection. But as they went, so this initial low confidence changed, right? They reported a steep learning curve and became more and more confident each week, which was just really neat to see. They also reported that this data collection improves their clinical skills overall, so not just their data collection skills. And so they talked about how this kind of process improved their accuracy and consistency across sessions and within sessions, how they could learn to balance their rigorous data collection with patient engagement and active listening and being really involved, right? That great therapeutic rapport that needs to be built. And so they thought that this approach really allowed them for that. And then they started to, as the 4 weeks kind of went along, they started to kind of really understand how how data collection processes in general help to generalize to clinical skills, maybe outside of aphasia rehabilitation, and to a broader audience. And so this is just a really interesting piece for us to be considering as we fold in our orientation. And so collectively, right, these small studies, all of them small little groups of our students over many different years, have helped us to understand how to develop a really strong orientation program. And I will say that each year it gets a little tighter and a little better. But I thought now we could turn to that and look at the logistics of implementing an orientation program for students. So this I thought I'd just pull from this year's ICAP that we're just finished. We're in the middle of week 2 of student orientation, and so this is kind of an overview of what it looks like. A couple of weeks of student orientation and training. We do some pre-treatment evaluations. You see 4 weeks of ICAP treatment. Again, at the end of the program, you see the post-treatment evaluations, and then we wrap up with one-on-one debriefing. So the student meets with their assigned family with aphasia, does all the debriefing, and then there's also final student evaluations once the patients have left. So this is just a big picture overview. And then I wanted to just talk you through the different pieces of our orientation. So over the course of 2 weeks, we do some didactic learning, some experiential learning and practice, some independent and group-based planning work, and then some opportunities to have interprofessional education and practice planning. So coming into the ICAP, the students have taken a 1-semester aphasia course. This is over the course of 16 weeks. It happens to be during the fall of their first year of graduate school, and it includes what you would expect in an introductory course, graduate level course to aphasia. So some pathophysiology, differential diagnosis, lots of aphasia profile learning. There's a very strong influence of the WHO ICF and person-centered care throughout the course, introduction to the life participation approach to aphasia, and then the details of doing strong aphasia assessment and treatment, and with some focus on specific treatment approaches, but typically a little more broad. Some of these students, as I mentioned, right, have had some clinical training before the ICAP. So they don't usually have clinical training with people with aphasia, but they might. There are some regular rotations on campus that involve more standard care once or twice a week, aphasia rehab. And so they might have one of those rotations. But the majority of them come into the ICAP with no aphasia rehab clinical training. Students also, we ask them to do some reading before they come to orientation. So you can see there on the left what we ask them to do ahead of time. We tell them they're going to get tested on it. We never test them, but we give them that little bit of motivation so that they have done some reading, and to revisit some of the LPAA video tutorials from Aphasia Access that they were most likely oriented to in the aphasia course, but it will have been a year. And then I don't think I need to read through this, but you can see the vast kind of list of didactic content that we go over the course of 2 weeks. We always start the orientation with some patient-centered videos. So if you know Gal's story from the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, Steve's story, these are lovely, free, patient-focused aphasia journeys. And then the second day, we start the day with a movie called Speechless. We provide an orientation to the ICAP model and its theoretical foundations. We provide a little bit about the structure of what our ICAP looks like and the evidence base that we have. Get all into sorts of minutia like clinical documentation procedures, SOAP notes, and our electronic medical record and all of that stuff. And then, of course, focus on things like collaborative goal setting, what kind of treatment sessions they're going to be delivering, how do you develop aphasia-friendly materials, how do we start to know which evidence-based treatment approaches to deliver, and then focus on communication partner training and the life participation approach to aphasia. I'm happy to make any of these slides available to you. This is the reading list that they go through chronologically through the orientation. This slide just provides an overview of what our orientation looks like with that content we just discussed. I'm going to talk to you in just a minute about the pre-treatment evaluations because they offer an opportunity for experiential learning. But you can see here that there's, we've tried to spread a lot of content across 2 weeks, and not quite 2 weeks because we always seem to have a holiday in the mix. So I think one of the pieces that's so important for onboarding graduate student clinicians is making sure that they have loads of opportunity to practice and to get their hands in the dirt a little bit as they're gearing up to meet their patients for the first time. So we do a whole lot with assessment training. We talk them through first what our assessment battery looks like. They then have the opportunity to watch an assessment of one of our incoming patients. Dr. Jenna Griffin administers that assessment, and the rest of us are watching that assessment session on video, live, so that we can talk them through and answer their questions about what the assessment battery purpose is or why Dr. Griffin is doing something to modify things during the session. So that guided observation is a crucial point so that they feel better prepared to administer the assessment battery themselves. We then give them time to practice administering any of the tests in pairs. And then they get to go and administer the assessment battery to their assigned patient under direct supervision, right? So our clinical educator is in the room 100% of that time and provides feedback and support as needed. And then following all of those assessments, we meet as a team and we debrief all of the patients, what we learned through those assessments, and we do some team scoring as well to make sure that we are really teaching solid assessment fidelity to these students as well. From an evidence-based treatment approach perspective, we ask our students to watch our clinical educators deliver a mock treatment approach, so just some role playing. Then they need to go practice, and then they need to come back and teach each other in the group format how to deliver a evidence-based treatment approach. They work together to develop aphasia-friendly treatment approach instructions so that they're prepared to walk into these sessions with their patients. And then they're asked to to match up with peers and practice data collection during just a mock trial run of some of the treatment approaches that they've selected to work on with their patients. And then you can also just see here that we have lots of time for them to be working in groups to develop their plans for the various types of sessions that they will deliver during the ICAP. Our last piece of orientation has to do with interprofessional education and practice. So over the years, it kind of varies as to which interprofessional folks are available to participate in the ICAP. But we do a pre-ICAP lunch and learn where each interprofessional discipline comes in and the students teach each other about their disciplines. And then the interprofessional participants, so the graduate student clinicians from different disciplines, will observe some of the pre-ICAP assessment sessions. They'll attend some of those assessment debriefings, and then there will be staged periodic interprofessional team meetings with all of the students working together throughout the ICAP. I'm not going to go into all of the details of what happens during the ICAP, but recognize that there is ongoing guidance and feedback for the students, right, in addition to the orientation and onboarding that they get. So lots of direct, respectful feedback from the clinical educators, daily team meetings and debriefings at the end of the day after the ICAP ends. There's group feedback and individual feedback. The clinical educators are providing daily written feedback to each graduate student clinician. There are various assignments that take place over the course of the ICAP, and so they're getting tracked changes and comments on all of those assignments, their clinical documentation, their treatment stimuli, their lesson plans, all of that sort of thing. And then, the hallway conversations that happen, right? The here and there or off the cuff co-treating and support that happens throughout the ICAP. We also do some assessment of our graduate student clinicians, and so they complete a pre and post ICAP assessment, self-assessment of their knowledge and skills of aphasia, interprofessional practice, and knowledge and skills. This is a survey, and then they complete weekly self-reflections of clinical delivery. And we ask them a question per week that they have 5 minutes or less to respond to, which is this weekly ecological momentary assessment about where they're at currently with the ICAP experience. And at the very end, they meet with their clinical educator for a formal knowledge and skills assessment that's part of their clinical rotation. So lots of opportunities for us to understand how students are doing throughout the program and also comparing pre-post outcomes. Okay, so in just a little wrap up here so that we have lots of time for questions, I just wanted to pull together a few of the things that we've learned about incorporating graduate student clinicians into the ICAP. Really important is that we have to prepare the students ahead of time for knowing that they're coming into a program that's high intensity, and it's a fairly novel learning context for them. So One of the things that's really novel is the rapid turnaround time for feedback and change, right? So in a traditional clinical rotation, you might have a day or two or three between times of seeing your patient. And these students are tasked with being given feedback, incorporating that feedback into their kind of clinical psyche, and then being able to change and implement those changes the next day for the next day of therapy, right? And so this is a really different model than what they're used to. And so we've really realized that we need to do a whole lot of talking with these students. We communicate with them via email many times before the ICAP rotation, helping them to understand that this is going to feel very different than other clinical rotations that they've had because they're so early in their career still, right? We also have realized that student clinicians, um, after participating in this ICAP, it kind of challenges their assumptions about what usual care should be for people with aphasia and what aphasia rehabilitation looks like. And that's a really interesting concept for us to be thinking about. And I think we have a lot more to learn about that. Um, and I really wanted to end by just talking about how we really believe that student clinicians do a phenomenal job providing high quality intervention for people with aphasia, and that this particular model allows us to leverage their very recent learning, right? It's not been a year since they've had an aphasia course, and then they've had 2 weeks of really intensive orientation. So we've been able to leverage their recent learning of aphasia best practice and their singular commitment, right? So the only thing they're doing is doing this ICAP for 6 weeks. They're not in another class. They're not doing other clinical rotations. And so they can really provide exceptional care. And I think that this is something that is sometimes folks think that student-led ICAPs might be not as high quality as those by experienced clinicians. And I think that that's not what we're seeing. The constant supervision and feedback, and then their like innovativeness as young clinicians is quite remarkable. And so I just wanted to kind of leave on that note that these students do a phenomenal job. They provide incredibly high quality services, and this model is rewarding both for our patients and for us as educators. I'm happy to talk more about some challenges as well, but I think I'd like to open it up for questions now so that we have enough time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kathy. We actually do have quite a few questions, so I'll just jump straight into them. So the first one's from Annie Hill. So thank you, Kathy, for the insightful presentation. For those universities that might be unable to implement an out-of-term student-led ICAP, what are some of the learnings you can share that might assist us to better plan and implement a student-led ICAP during our term teaching?
Yeah, and so this is a really interesting question because when we first developed this model, there was not summer funding available. And so we had to do some very strategic thinking to figure out how do we staff this, right? How
Mm,
the students wanted it, um, but there wasn't really a good financial model to support it. Our university has changed a little bit over the years. That's made it a little bit easier, but I would say some of the things, if you're trying to embed it in a typical year, I don't think you can do. So what we learned was we could not do the intensity of this, like 4 days a week, 5 to 6 hours a day is not possible. The
mm, mm,
students don't have that much time. And for us, I don't know about everybody, but like our space is more limited, right? So we have an operating clinic on campus. It's much busier during the academic year with a variety of different populations. And so we don't have as much physical space to spread out. So when we did try it, we did it for 3 days a week, and we did it every other day, so not consecutive days. And that helped the students a little bit be able to manage the load of turning around feedback while also attending all their other classes and doing their homework and all of that. So I think modifying the intensity would be really important. I also think space is an issue, and trying to figure out staffing models with clinical educators could be challenging depending on the model at each university.
Thank you. All right, so we've got quite a few questions about the students now.
Good.
So Sam Harvey is wondering if you can just tell us a little bit more about the students. Is this clinical experience quite popular? And how do you determine if a student is going to be a good candidate?
Huh. Okay, so I have zero control over whether the student is a good candidate or not. That I have abdicated that to my graduate student advisor and clinical placement director. Um, so so was the first part, do they like it? Is it high?
Is it popular?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So many students request this rotation to the clinical placement director. So I'm not privy to them. They don't come to me and say, hey, I want to do this rotation. They'll go talk to the placement director about that. And so then I usually hear about it, right? We talk on a regular basis. So yes, students want this rotation. They're terrified of the rotation at the same time. So it's interesting. It's right. They know this is a unique experience, that they're not likely going to get anything like this. For us, and we're rural, right? We're like in the Mountain West. There's really no giant hospitals nearby. We have hospitals, but they're not huge, right? So this is a unique rotation for students. So yeah, they do want it. We do not ever have a problem having enough students for the rotation. I have often wanted to be able to control the candidacy for the student clinician, but I actually think we have now tailored the orientation so that we get what we need.
Yeah.
Right? Like that is why we have put so much effort into developing this onboarding, is so that no matter who the student is, whatever their background is, whatever level of clinical experience, we can get them through this successfully, and
Mhm.
and not in a way that's horrible for the student, right? You don't want the student to be um, like catastrophically paralyzed by this process, right? And so I think the orientation process onboards them as well. So one of the things that we try to do is actually we match the intensity of the ICAP program to the orientation. So they come in and they have to just start work, they're here all day. We kind of build their stamina for 2 weeks, so that by the time the ICAP launches, they're in a better position to have that resilience.
Yeah.
I just popped my head in to ask how our students were doing today, right before this, and the look on their face is total fatigue.
Yeah.
And yet they're really excited. They're now at the point where they know they get to meet their patient on Thursday this week, Thursday or Friday. And so the excitement is building, but it is that blend of excitement with how to get all of the tasks, the learning done, right? Like the learning done to be able to feel competent. And they don't feel competent their first week, which is okay. That's
Yeah.
part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually going to combine the next three questions because they're all kind of similar. So we're just wondering, in the longer term, what's the experience of students coming back for more research opportunities after being involved in ICAP? Do you have any sort of research about the roles that some of these students have gone on to do? And do you know how students feel once they're out in that clinical world where the funding is so different?
Yeah, I know. So I think these are all next step questions for us.
Yeah.
So we absolutely want to know what's happening with students. So um, there, we've had several students come back for a PhD. So, and want to be involved in research processes. So then it's a question of, did the ICAP modify like their goals clinically, or did they get out and do some clinical work and then realize they still have all these questions, right? I don't think we know those answers yet. Um, uh, what I can say is that it's really interesting here because there's so few services for post-acute care in the region that a lot of our students are trying to be innovative in
Mm,
developing new models. And so they're like, okay, there's no way right out of school and right into clinical practice that I could do something like this. It's too much of an undertaking. But what can I do
mm,
to change usual care just enough to be giving folks a little bit more, right? A little more intensity, a little more comprehensiveness. Can I start some groups in my region? We have miles and miles and miles between cities and towns, and so trying to figure out how to help. I think for us to help develop students that want to be doing this stuff, but it changes. What I have heard repeatedly is that it changes the way they think about clinical delivery, no matter what the population is,
mm. Yeah.
and they're not satisfied anymore, right? Like they're not satisfied with clinical, usual care, right? They want it to be more like this kind of model.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think we've got time for one more very quickly. So Catherine Pettigrove is wondering, when you first started the ICAP, was it challenging to advocate for a new placement model?
Yeah. I was really lucky. I fell into this um, situation where the speech language pathology program was in its infancy, and the state had nothing. That
Mm,
there were no speech language pathologists. We were like the whole state was understaffed, and I actually was worried we wouldn't have, like, how would we get patients? I was thinking, I'm in the middle of nowhere. How am I going to get referrals for any kind of service delivery, let alone an intensive one where I have a cohort, right, of people coming in? And so I did not personally get pushback because there was nothing here. Nothing existed. People wanted anything,
mm,
and our administration, for example, was like, well, how are you going to train your students? However you want to get that done is fine by us. um, but I think that's just because nothing was in place. And I think that's a unusual situation to find oneself in. I did try to run a similar program when I was in California at a state university, and I was able to kind of like manipulate the schedule enough where we could get like 3 days a week of a cohort model, and that was good. But it really took a lot of conversations with a lot of different clinical providers and how to find the space and how to at like let folks know that this model would benefit both the students and the families living with
mm.
aphasia. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. So we actually have more questions than we have time for today, but I'll just finish up. So Kathy, I'll just share my screen
Oh
now.
yeah. Let me
Thanks.
get out of here. Uh, I can't find the close. Am I stopped sharing now?
Not yet.
It does not want to stop. Oh, there it is. Okay, it came back. Great. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, not from current. Okay, so thanks again to Kathy. If you'd like to revisit today's seminar or share it with others, we will have the recording available on the Aphasia CRE YouTube channel, along with many of our past seminars. To stay informed about our work, you can follow the Aphasia CRE on our blog, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And by doing so, you'll receive updates on the latest research, participant recruitment opportunities, and a wealth of other resources. Kathy, I know that there was a question around if you were willing to share your reading lists. So what we might do for for this presentation is add it to the comments or the description on the YouTube video.
That sounds great. And if anyone wants to reach out and email me, I'm happy to share more materials with you.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've got some fantastic presenters lined up for the rest of 2025. In June, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Leora Cherney and Ms. Laura Kinsey, who will be presenting on measuring real-world communication of people with aphasia, preliminary findings and ethical considerations. Thanks again, everybody, for coming, and again to Kathy. It was a fantastic presentation, and we'll see you all again soon.